Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FECGTV, which is the Fisher Educational Consulting Group YouTube channel. Here, we focus on bringing awesome guests like the guests that I have in front of me to talk about very relevant topics in the field of education, very contemporary topics. We also focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Through those means, we try to highlight and lift up voices of particular populations that are traditionally underrepresented or muted or unheard. So today we have a phenomenal guest that I have been very excited and anxious and anticipating coming on board. She is our first superintendent. Her name is Dr. Kristy Spann, and today she'll be joining us to talk about how we include diversity, equity, and inclusion in our school systems. So with that being said, Dr. Spann, how are you doing today?
Good morning. It's so good to see you. And please call me Kristy.
Will do. Thank you.
I'm doing very well. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday indeed.
Such an honor to be with you, somebody who's been so committed to equity in schools for as long as I've known you. It's been more than a couple of years now. I think we've known each other 10, 12, probably close to around 2007.
Yeah. I'm thinking at least 14 or 15 years, somewhere in there.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah. I'm thinking, actually, I'm going to check. I think it might have been 2006, but I'm going to check and see.
It could very well have been 2006.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said to everyone, I try to bring people who not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And I've had the pleasure of knowing, so I guess if we round it up, it'll be almost 20 years. So yeah. I've known Dr. Spann for quite some time, and I've known her to be very sincere about this work, putting her shoulder against the stone and making things happen. So I wanted to talk to someone who really believes what they're saying. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in because I want to honor your time and our audience time as well. So tell us about you and your pathway to your current position.
Okay, well, I started off in, obviously, teaching, and I taught as I also got my paramedic license. So I want to back up. I went to the university to get a degree in teaching the blind and visually impaired. So my background is in special education. And as I was working on that, I also worked on becoming an EMT and then a paramedic. I had student teaching opportunities in Bloomfield Hills and Detroit Public Schools, full semesters, because it was special ed. So I had to have a full semester of gen ed teaching and a full semester of special ed teaching the blind and visually impaired. And then I put that work on hold for a little bit so I could work as a paramedic, teach EMTs and paramedics for the state before I jumped in with teaching children. And that I'm bringing up because it really helped clarify for me over time what's important and what's not important, what's an emergency and what's not an emergency. That work really helped set that for me. So I got my degrees. I taught in a couple of different schools, elementary, second, third, fourth grades, a combination of multi-age, year-round, traditional calendar. I served as the president of the teachers union, became principal of an elementary school, moved to another elementary school, got my master's degree in the art of teaching, ed specialist, my doctoral degree, have a fellowship in there through Saginaw Valley on leadership, a lot of work on leadership. So I've followed this path and didn't set out to become a principal, did not set out to become an executive director of education, did not set out to become a superintendent of education. Things happen in life and you find yourself at a door and you make a choice to walk through or you find you have to walk through. However, where I am is really intentional. And when I made the decision to move forward, I interviewed in a variety of places. It was really important to me to be someplace where I felt that I could be in service of youth and families in a community who have a number of people who are historically marginalized or struggle, which is not to say that there's a problem with the community or there's a problem with the children and the families. There's not, but a more impoverished background or places where you have more diversity tend to not have equitable access to resources and opportunities. And I don't think that's the community's fault. So the community is amazing where I am, but I've chosen to be here as opposed to a place that's better resourced. And it's really important that I hope that you're understanding me, that when I talk about where I am, it is, I don't see I don't see shortcomings with my community. That's not why I'm here. I just recognize that some places are resourced differently. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's fair to talk about resources. Resources drive a lot of the student outcomes, right? Whether
Great.
we're dealing with mental health issues, we're dealing with academic outcomes, resources will be the difference. So I think you outlining or highlighting the resources of your district versus others, it's not an issue at all. I don't think it speaks to the people, it just speaks to the reality on the ground.
Yes, of what's available and what isn't.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully that changes for the better. More resources come your district's way.
Thank you.
Yeah. So our next question, tell me a little bit about how has the pandemic impacted your district and the work you're doing, or more specifically, the work that you're trying to do?
Yeah, I don't think that in that respect that my district is unique at all. I think we're all facing very similar challenges with the pandemic in particular, coupled with world events. It is a really challenging time for everybody. People are overwhelmed, stressed, fearful, tired. We all yearn to have connections, but the pandemic has made it challenging to be as connected. For 2 years, we had to distance, cover our faces. People can't see our expressions. They can't hear our voices. We haven't been able to spend time with all of our family members. We've had a lot of death because of it. So it's made it incredibly challenging on so many levels. Education obviously has been challenging, but our communities have been challenging. And then our kids bear those hardships too and bring them with them everywhere they go. We all do. So that has been hard. Our staff have been challenged. They bear those burdens. They have to come and be there in service of kids, and they're trying to be the best version of themselves, carrying a lot of burden for themselves, their families, their communities, and their students. It's complicated. It's complicated. Of course, there have been some great opportunities from this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
There's a facility now with connecting virtually through Zoom or Google Meet, as it were. For example, it has forced us to rethink how we approach some of our lessons and how we make things available to families 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a benefit. Go ahead.
Absolutely. That equity of access piece, that's a great determinant. And if you think about student outcomes, right, measurable positive outcomes, access is everything. So definitely.
It is. Mm-hmm. And we still have issues of access. Those still exist. I have a family I spoke to yesterday. I wanted to check in. How's it going? The youngsters having, had trouble this past year. I want to make sure that we are making sure we've got everything in place so that this next year is going to be positive. So I check in, and they'd like to have access to some classes online, but they need a hotspot. They don't have internet. Okay. Well, I called at 5 o'clock yesterday on Monday, that'll be the first thing that I have to deal with. So even though we've made considerable progress, and even though we're back face to face, we still need to attend to those issues of access. They're not givens. So we have to keep touching base to make sure that those connections are being met.
Thank you. So I kind of want to drill down for the rest of this interview. I kind of want to just set the tone about your perspective on things. So I want to ask you a very specific question. What do the words diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you personally?
Right. To me personally, it means that all means all, that we find a way to come together and learn to listen to each other, not hear each other, really listen, both with our heads, but also with our hearts, so that we understand other people's intentions and that we welcome people for who they are and who they're striving to become. We're all beings that are works of art. We're all also in progress. It's a journey. Life is a journey. This past year, I participated in the Social Justice Leadership Collaborative. It was a multi-month come together with a cohort of people. One of the norms that I really liked and that I'm carrying with me very intentionally now is this idea that we should not freeze people in time, right? That's a norm. So whatever I have done or said before isn't going to necessarily be reflective of who I am now, because I'm growing. That snapshot, maybe it was at a time in my life when I was less knowledgeable or less skilled. Maybe it was just a bad day for me. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had a slip of the tongue. But if we freeze people in that moment, and that's how we remember them, and we don't allow them to grow, or we don't see them as humans who are evolving, then we really stunt our collective growth. So you asked me about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's this recognition that holistically, we're all on a journey together. And if we freeze people in time, we harm ourselves personally, we harm them, and we harm the whole. So it's important that we welcome other perspectives. We listen with our heart and our head, and we're always trying to go forward in a better way that's more welcoming. It's something more than tolerance, right? It's something, and it's not even, I'm Pollyanna-esque, I get it, but I really like to believe that given enough time, everybody can grow into a better version and be more welcoming of everybody else.
Definitely, thank you. And so what I hear you saying is just approach it from a more holistic perspective, more comprehensive. Look at all the moving parts. We're all interconnected. So we're not going to make this journey without looking at everyone and being, I don't want to say tolerant, but being understanding.
Well, yeah. Okay. So this requires a lot of effort. It doesn't happen passively. It requires that each of us are willing to be impacted by others and hopefully seeking to be impacted by others. I'm a firm believer that visuals are really important, right? Pictures worth 1,000 words. And I gathered before we sat down some books. You can't see them at the moment, but I'm looking around and I'm seeing some piles of things that I brought.
Feel free to showcase a few.
So how do we help ourselves grow into better versions of ourselves? Healing the Heart of Democracy was written by Parker Palmer. He's known for his book, The Courage to Teach. He's a white man. He is a Quaker. And I think it's important to understand the context from which books are written. I mean, you take this book, which is a great book. It's The Courage to Create a Politics Worthy of the Human Spirit. Create a politics worthy of the human spirit. Just to highlight who this book is written, who it's dedicated to. I don't know if these names will mean much to you. Christina Green was, she lived 2001 to 2011. She was a white girl who died at the hands of a gunman in Arizona at a grocery store. Addie Mae Collins lived from 1949 to 1963. Denise McNair lived from 1951 to 1963. Carol Robertson lived from 1949 to 1963. Cynthia Wesley, 1949 to 1963. 1963 just showed up a lot. Those poor young ladies were in the church in Alabama that was bombed. They died at the ages of 11 and 12. When we forget that politics is about weaving a fabric of compassion and justice on which everyone can depend, the first to suffer are the most vulnerable among us, our children, our elderly, our mentally ill, our poor, and our homeless. As they suffer, so does the integrity of our democracy. May the heartbreaking deaths of these children and the hope and promise that was in their young lives help us find the courage to create a politics worthy of the human spirit, right? So this book is a handbook for how we come together, all of us. This one, stamped from the beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, was written by Dr. Kendi, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. He's a Black man, a scholar, who is on a mission to help us understand our collective history better, because we've all been a part of this history and we've all been harmed by it, right? This work is important. The work of Resma Menachem, My Grandmother's Hands. Whether I look at texts for adults, and I have a host of them, whole book talk, I promise, but Dr. Noguera, The Trouble with Black Boys and Other Reflections on Race, Equity, and the Future of Public Education. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Tatum. Courageous Conversations About Race. The Guide for White Women about teaching or who teach Black boys. We want to do more than survive abolitionist teaching. And there's more. I've got piles. The point is, what are we doing to make ourselves better and to have a more holistic understanding of our histories? And it's not just about adults. It's about children's books that I could go on. You get the idea, right?
I do.
I'll stop. But I have stacks around me. I wish you could.
No. Thank you. And when we do part 2 of our interview next year, we'll definitely have you pan around and show us all of your books.
But the point is, we have to be intentional about our own education, our own understandings, because then I'm going to behave differently. And in behaving differently, I lead differently, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. Your answer to the question I just asked actually lays out a perfect pathway for us to transition to this next question. So, what is your biggest piece of advice for education leaders getting started with equity work? Seek clarity. Okay. Tell me about that. Expound.
When I got to my job, my current job, I was the 6th superintendent in 6 years. When you look at full superintendents and interims, there was some healing that had to happen. And right after I got there, people would show up and say, "So, Kristy, this this person frustration." I'd say, "Okay, well, let's just stop for a moment. Let's suspend judgment. We don't have to be so quick to judge. We don't have to do that. So please suspend judgment. Let's seek clarity. Let's find out the whole story. Let's see what else is going on. Every time. Okay, well, let's suspend judgment. Let's seek clarity. Okay, well, we don't have to judge. Let's just seek clarity. I said it so many times that the people that I work with immediately in my front office at the admin building reduced my words to a piece of artwork that hangs on my wall in my office. It says, suspend judgment to seek clarity. I referenced it so many times. The principal, I'd been there for probably 5 months. He calls me. He says, Kristy, oh my gosh, I just had this person in my office. They were really upset, and I heard your words come out of my mouth. I said, well, let's do what the superintendent's always saying. Let's not be so quick to judge. Let's find out what's going on. I said, Justin, how did that work for you? He says, worked really well. I said, I'm so glad to hear that. I got that same call from others. This was made for me personally by somebody we just hired this past year, Keith Edmonds, who is a national speaker, and he's such a gift to our district. He's had a really challenging history himself, which is how he came to create a foundation and whatnot. And he works with kids as an interventionist, but he really believes in the power of what I say in terms of seeking clarity. And he had his mom make that for me as a separate piece. So my words of wisdom, number one, suspend judgment and seek clarity. That's hard to do. It takes time. It took me 4 years of actively working on that goal to make it a part of who I am. Think about the power of yet. This is my second piece of advice. Okay. What people don't know, they don't know yet. What they can't do yet. And if somebody doesn't behave in a way that doesn't make sense, first of all, seek clarity and find out why. But then if they didn't have the knowledge or the skills or the resources yet, then recognize that, help them recognize that, and help them grow. Bell Hooks. Do you know Dr. Hooks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She's one of my heroines. And one of the many, many books that she wrote is called All About Love. Not sitting in my stack right now. It's in a different stack. Mm-hmm. She wrote All About Love. And she defines love. It's not some little feeling you have in your heart. It's an action. It is what we do to help others become the best version of themselves. That's what love is. That means love is hard work. If you are actively trying to help somebody else become a better version of them, that's work. You do it with compassion.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Now, let me press you just a little bit further. You spoke to the people that are in your immediate influence, and I'm going to use, although you did not say, I'm going to use the term cabinet and your principal leaders. But how do you push your equity initiatives down to the other levels? So we're thinking about vertical alignment. So those that are directly interacting with the kids daily, how do you push your message down there?
Great question.
Not down there. How do you get, that's a poor choice of words. How do you get your message to that space?
How do I share it? Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is complicated because there isn't one way. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So it is in what I say and do on a daily basis. It's me being in the buildings. It's me being at all of the kids' events. It's how trying to live my life personally as an example of who I'm striving to be. Like I'm always trying to live into the person I'm trying to be. That sounds kind of awkward. It's in what I say. It's in the people that I bring in to provide education. Do you know who Dr. John Hodge is?
I do.
He's going to be in my district talking to my people, my entire staff, on August 25th. I can't tell you how excited I am. I cannot tell you how excited. This is a big deal. We're a little district. And bringing somebody in like Dr. Hodge is what a gift. But, so how do I get the message across? It's in my expectations. It's in the opportunities I provide. Do you know Henry McClendon? You may not. So Henry McClendon works for the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And both of these gentlemen are Black men. And so compelling and so so skilled. I mean, I'm a firm believer, you need to bring the absolute best. Time is scarce. You need to always bring in the very best that you possibly can. These men are amazing, and they provided education to the whole staff in Bentley. Well, Dr. Hodge soon, and Mr. McClendon. That was a series of lessons. When I had a particularly challenging situation with my with my football team one year, I brought Mr. McClendon in to help, and we provided opportunities for restoration with the staff, with the families and the staff, with the kids, and then with all of them together. It was a very intentional piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the conversations that I have with families. It's in the conversations I have with students. It's in the ways that I interface with the community. I purposely belong to the Kiwanis. It's an international service organization whose mission is to improve the world one child and one community at a time. Those meetings are every Friday. I show up to 3 out of 4 a month. I serve as their secretary, but I'm also a voice for all of my children and the expectations for what public education can and should be in that forum. I sit on the Chamber of Commerce. I bring the same vision and passion to the businesses in the community. I sit on the board of the shelter of Flint. It's a homeless shelter. It's the same thing. It is in the resources we buy, the books we put in the library, how we're going about teaching and improving the skill set around teaching mathematics, around teaching reading, around teaching history, around individualized education. It's complicated, Sean. How do we bring this forward? We bring it forward in everything that we do, right? In all of the initiatives that we undertake.
I want to pause you there as I'm listening to you. I want to back up, and maybe I should address this earlier. Could you tell us a little bit about, as you mentioned, Flint, could you talk a little bit about the location of your district and maybe some of the demographics? That's very important, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure, it is important. So I am a superintendent of a small district. It's called Bentley Community Schools, which is situated in the city of Burton. As you're looking this way, you have Flint, and the city of Burton is on the borders, Flint on the east side, okay, through here. My students come both from the city of Burton, and many of them come from Flint. 1/5, 20% of my total student makeup comes from Flint schools. That's problematic. Not that they come from Flint, but that we have a political system that disperses our kids beyond their local neighborhood schools, and that gets really complicated really fast. To be sure, I welcome all of my kids, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I also don't feel that other districts should be taking kids from others, whether it's adjacent districts taking our kids or us taking Flint kids from Flint or Mount Morris or wherever else, Atherton schools and so on. So that gets complicated because I believe that everybody should have the same access to educational opportunities regardless of their zip code. Now that said, my district, right, 800 students, it's small. It is 68% white, which means that it's 32% mostly 16% Black and multiracial, 16% Hispanic. Sometimes Hispanic presents as white, sometimes it presents as not white, right? It just depends. Our poverty is 90%. That's pretty high poverty rate. It's one of the highest in the county. And Genesee is the 4th poorest county in the state of Michigan. Out of 85 counties, we're the 4th poorest. So that's hard. We talk about opportunity and resources. We're struggling. I don't have, in the city of Burton, Bentley happens to be located in an area with very, very little business. they're gone. The businesses have dried up, they're gone. So we don't have a tax base. So we get very little money back. When we run a bond, a millage, we passed our millage 2 years ago so that we could make facility upgrades important for our kids. They should be in well-resourced buildings. The best I could do was $2.2 million. That doesn't go very far. Next door to me, they have an $85 million bond that they just passed. That's crazy. I have two. And what I need are things like roofs and boilers. My kids don't have, there's no moving air in those buildings. There's no ventilation. If you want the air to move, you open the window. That's it.
Thank you. And the reason I asked that was I wanted to highlight, and I apologize. I should have asked it earlier. And what I want to do is kind of frame your understanding of equity and what you're facing. This is a teaching video, right? And so most of my audience, they look and say, well, what are other people doing? They're dealing with these same situations, but they're like, I need a thought partner. And so one of the best ways to do it, I found, is to actually create a repository of videos where leaders similar, or maybe sometimes not similar, express like what they're doing. So people say, I can think about that. So I wanted to ask that. Now that we've highlighted your resource in your district and the demographics, I also want to talk about what are some of the barriers that you've experienced with regards to implementing equity. I thought it was a great segue. We talked about your resources. Let's talk about barriers.
Sure. Boy, so barriers: political, financial, social. I think those are the three biggest barriers that I run into. I'll keep thinking and I might come up on something else.
I think those three are a good start.
Yeah. So politically, for so many years, hundreds of years, laws have been enacted that privilege certain groups of people more so than others, often based on the color of their skin, but also based on their socioeconomic background. And so when you're in an area that has a lot of socioeconomic stress and some groups of people that are historically marginalized or oppressed, you find that those laws don't privilege your folks, right? And so it's this constant effort to keep pushing for change. I'm sure you're probably aware that the Michigan School Finance Collaborative did a huge study and talked about what it takes to educate kids. We know what it takes. Now we have to do something about it. And the reality is that my students really need more money than adjacent districts. We know I have Flint on one side, and Flint has a lot of money that has flowed into it as a result of the water crisis. And well, they should, but it's more complicated than that, because the students who have been impacted by the water crisis, some of them are still there. But Flint in 1980 had 44,000 students. 44,000 students in 1980. GM left, and it's been declining ever since. Flint has fewer than 3,000 kids left. Fewer than 3,000 attending schools. And there are a lot of students who live in Flint who go to Bentley, Bendel, Atherton, Grand Blanc, Mount Morris, Genesee, Carmen Ainsworth, Flushing, Beecher, Davison. You get the Schwartz Creek. I could go on. These are all the surrounding school districts. And that water money doesn't always follow the kids. So you have Flint receiving a lot of money, but the kids who have been impacted aren't all going to those schools. They're now spread out because of schools of choice, right? So there are some, I don't begrudge anything that Flint is getting. I'm just saying it's complicated. It's complicated. And we keep creating laws. And I truly believe we're trying to do a better job about how we resource education. But even when we're faced with crises like the Flint water crisis, and how we infuse money in to try to help solve a problem, and money doesn't solve every problem, you still have issues you have to deal with. There's distrust. We talk about social issues. There's distrust. That's a problem. When people don't trust the institutions of government, I'm the government. You don't get much whiter than me. I'm like one shade darker than albino. I can't change that. It is what it is. So I'm always busy trying to build social capital with my families, especially my families of color, so that they see that I'm an ally. And in places where I could be a better ally, help me understand what that looks like, because I'm willing to. What I don't know and can't do, I just don't know and can't do yet, right? I reference these things so often, that's why I have them with me. But it's about building social capital so that they can build trust. I'm one piece of it. You have the health department, you have the local government, and we need people to trust that collectively we're all trying to do what's best for everybody, even as we know not everybody's trying to do what's best for everybody, right? That undermines the trust. So that's a barrier. That's a huge barrier. And it's not something that's going to be easy to overcome. I told you when I got here, real quick, when I got here 4 years ago, I'm in my 5th year now in this school district. One, people believed I wouldn't stay. I would add this to my resume and leave. And I would go someplace else that paid more and had more resources. It would be easier. I'm still here. They're shocked. Oh God, Sean. So 4 years. So I just lost my thought. When it hits me again, I'm gonna lift it up.
Yeah,
Go
absolutely.
ahead, ask me your question, but I'm gonna come back to this, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to kind of, in my interviews, I do something called flare and focus. So you definitely gave us the wide view. I want to drill down to maybe a few technical items.
Sure.
So as I'm thinking about, and this may or may not be true, sometimes I've heard that it's easier to make major shifts with a small district, and sometimes it's harder because everyone knows it, everyone. So bear in mind what I just said when I asked this question. Do you have a diversity and equity task force in your district or some body that handles that type of work?
We do not have a task force like that in our district. We don't have any task forces in the district. We're all always working together. So the admin team, it's little. I have one elementary school, I have one middle school, I have one high school. There's 3 principals. There's me. There is somebody who addresses curriculum and technology initiatives. That's 5 of us. And the 5 of us are always coming together and working on these types of issues. And then it gets pushed back out at the building level through professional learning. We do have teachers who help decide what professional learning will look like. And I suppose you could call that a task force. It doesn't feel like the traditional task force as you might think of it, because we're so little, right? But there is this cadre of us. My school board is a really important part of this equation. And I'm really fortunate. This school district is really fortunate to have 7 people there who are so committed to the idea that all means all. My school board, do you remember Larry Thomas at Oakland Schools?
I do.
And so Larry is a really skilled facilitator, especially when it comes to issues of diversity, whether it's racial, economic, social, the LGBTQ community, and so on. Just a very skilled facilitator. And I brought him in, and he ran a series of workshops for my Board of Education and my admin team a couple of years ago, so that we were all on the same page looking forward around diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically for this topic, right? I mean, it's this kind of important work. When I told you earlier, it's complicated. It is, because you have to think about all of these different stakeholders and what positional power they hold and social influence they hold in order that we're all doing this work going in the same direction.
Absolutely. Now, along those same lines, as I'm just listening to you talk, it's making me think about more things. So you don't have an explicit or express diversity task force, but you may have some other pathways. So I'm thinking of, the question that comes to mind is, how do you give voice to your non-majority, it's a two-part question, your non-majority students and your non-majority staff?
So again, there's like not one way. It happens through incidental conversations, right? For example, I'm walking through a hall and I stop and talk to, okay, incidentally, 2 weeks ago, summer school credit recovery at the high school was finishing up. One of my students in there, she saw me. She's a young Black lady. When she saw me, she stopped. She popped up. She came running over. She threw her arms around me. I threw my arms around her. Big hug. Hey, girl, how you doing? It's good. I said, I'm so glad you're getting these credits. I said, but I'm also kind of I'm glad you're here, but I'm sorry you're here. Because really, if you'd been doing your work in this past school year, you wouldn't be here right now. Lots of people are here, right? Black, white, Hispanic. Lots of people are doing credit recovery. And she's like, I know. And I said, here's the thing. This year's going to look different, right? It'll be, because I'm here. And if you need help with something, you come get me. My office is across that parking lot. You know that. She says, I know. I said, I see you at the game. She's like, I know. I said, here's the thing. You are a smart, beautiful, capable Black woman, and the world needs you. The world needs your gifts. You have so much to offer. I don't know if a white woman has ever said to her, you are a smart.
So you're beginning to tell a story about how you give voice to students and staff. Yep, go ahead.
Incidentally, so I'll give you one example of an incidental communication. 2 weeks ago, credit recovery is coming to an end. I've got students, different kinds of students who are doing credit recovery. One of my students saw me as I was walking the hall. She stopped and popped up, big smile on her face, came over, threw her arms around me. I threw my arms around her. Hey girl, how you doing? She's like, oh, I'm doing great. It's good to see you, Dr. Spann. I said, it's so good to see you too. I was like, so I'm glad you're here. That's good. You're getting your credits. I said, but honestly, I'm sad you're here because that means you need to be here. Like, I know. And I said, honey, this year it's going to be different, right? Like this year, we're not going to need to come back and do credit recovery next year. I'm glad you're here, but next year's going to be different. I said, if you need help, come get me. You know where I am. You know where my office is. And you see me at the games. Like, I know. I said, here's the thing. You are a smart, beautiful, capable, young Black woman who has so much to offer the world. The world needs you. The world needs your gifts, right? This education, this is important. She sort of looked down. I said, no, you need to look at me. This is important stuff. Sean, I don't know that she's ever had a white woman say to her, you are a smart, capable Black woman who with gifts to share and the world needs you. But she needs that message, right? Like that's an important message. So there's incidental things like that, lots of examples of that, but incidentally, intentionally, Me going and sitting down and having lunch with kids in the lunchroom. Okay, guys, may I join you? I want to understand, how is it going? What's working for you at school? What's not working for you at school? Surveys are another way that we push out to all of our kids. 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. Sometimes it depends on what the survey is, but we put surveys out, and not just to the kids, but also to the families and the staff. That's important. It gives them a different way to respond and on different topics. Through classrooms, what am I hearing from the staff about what the needs are? What am I hearing from the administrators? I have really good administrators. I'm really blessed. Not only do the administrators really value diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're fighting for it, and they're willing to have those courageous conversations with staff, with students, with families. And that's great, because that's what we need. We need people who can have those courageous conversations, and people who can check their own perspectives and say, I hadn't thought about this. A couple of years ago, one of my administrators, great guy, really a great guy, super oriented around kids. He talked to me about a student who had always been viewed as female and was now transitioning and was using the pronouns he, him, as opposed to her and hers, she, her, hers. And so while it was just the two of us talking, the administrator and me, the administrator made reference to her, and I said, you mean him? Well, yeah. And then when I called the ISD, he says, this other thing happened and she da-da-da-da. I said, you mean he? Right. But she's not here. I said, he's not here. I said, here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether people are here or not. We have to be respectful of them, to them, and about them with others, right? And that transcends everything, Sean. That's true of race. It's true of the LGBTQ status. It's true of ethnicity. It's true of gender. It's true of ableism. It's true of athleticism. Pick something. What does that respect look like? And my principal said, I know, it's just hard for me to get used to. I said, I understand, but I'm going to stay the course with you because this is important work. And if I just go back for a moment, Sean, Dr. Hooks tells us that love is when we are committed to helping others be the best version of themselves. I love my administrators. I love my teachers. I love my janitors, my maintenance people, my food services folks, my secretaries, my kids, their families. And if we love them, we have to be committed to helping everybody be the best version of themselves.
Thank you. You're quite the DEI visionary. I just wrote in my notes, staying the course.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. This is something I highlight when I do my written summary. So just as I'm looking at time, I'm going to condense. There are a few things that you touched on that I was going to ask later on. So I'll skip those questions, just kind of jump into a few things around technical expertise. So thinking around representation, I didn't quite catch in your introduction about the diversity of your staff or what those demographics were. But when you're looking at recruiting, because you talked about bumping into the one young lady, and you said you don't know if a white woman's ever told her that she had such gifts and talents. But I'm also thinking, has she ever come across in the hallways a woman of color who told her these things? So talk to me about the diversity of how do you bring diversity, and not just racial? Because this specific channel, I've kind of mentioned race quite a bit, but we know that inclusion, diversity, and equity are much more than that. And you kind of tapped onto it when you talked about the gender ID, LGBTQIA, specifically focusing on the ally piece, right? So just tell me about that in general. How do you bring diverse staff in?
A good question. And I'm always open to suggestions of how I can do it better. Several years ago, after I got here, it was 2019, 2000, no, I don't know. It was a couple years ago. I specifically, because I was struggling with this, I can't hire people that don't apply. And that's a problem. So I went downtown Flint. There's a bookstore called Comma. Comma is owned by a Black woman. Her name is Egypt Otis. Love her. So I show up one day. I say, Egypt, we got to talk. She's like, okay, Kristy. We sat down, middle of her store. It's like a social hub. And I said, here's the thing. You know how important equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion are to me, cultural competence, but I can't hire people that don't apply. She's like, well, that's true. I said, I'm trying to figure out how do I transcend that barrier right now. So we brainstormed, we talked about job fairs, talked about how you post, where you post. But really the richest piece that came out of that is where might I set up a table? And so that was, I set up a table at Juneteenth, downtown Flint. I think I was the only white-based table, and I was for sure the only school district that set up a table. In the middle of Genesee County, I was the only school district. And I had all my postings for teachers, for teaching positions, custodial positions, secretarial positions. It's a small district. It's not like I have tons in all these categories, unlike, these other bigger districts that are looking for scads of people. But bus driver, a custodian, a couple of teachers, people I have those there. I made a point of purchasing things I could hand out to kids. So it was a friendly place and whatnot. And I was there for the whole day. I left once for 20 minutes just so I could go walk the street and see who else is there. And I left, my principals took turns staying with me at junctures throughout the day. There was such goodwill from that. I didn't get any hires. Nobody applied for anything that day, but that's okay, right? That was okay because word is out. What goes out, people stop, they talk like, it's really cool that you're here. It's really cool that you're here. We don't see anybody else here like this. I said, well, this is important work. And I can't hire people who don't apply, right? Literally, this is my message. And this is what's great about being a Bentley Bulldog. So part of it is getting a message into the community. Part of it is creating an opportunity. When I left that booth and went and walked the street, I'm walking down and I hear, hey, Dr. Spann. I turn, a couple of my students, and like, what are you doing here? It's just Juneteenth. I said, I've got a table set up for Bentley. Cross their arms, they look at me, they're like, what? What do you got a table over here for? I said, okay, so I'm down in Buckham Alley, right by, this other section of it. I said, well, because when you come to school, the people who work in the school should reflect the people who come to the school. And immediately they popped in, they're like, absolutely. And we needed to do a better job. I said, I know, that's why I'm here. They're like, oh my gosh. I said, I can't hire people who don't apply. So help me out. They didn't know about Comma Bookstore. They'd never been to Comma. And I've said, hey, come with me. I'll go introduce you to this really cool bookstore owned by a Black woman. It's a great social hub for everybody, but it specializes in books that are by and about and for the African-American community, right? I partner with the intermediate school district. They know how important it is for me to have a diverse workforce. We have those conversations. When we post, we try really hard to make sure that we're bringing in people that we can genuinely look at hiring that provide diversity. One of my colleagues as a superintendent, who's a Black man, great guy, he says, sometimes you go to an interview just because you'll get called for an interview just because you're Black, so they can say that they've interviewed Black people, but they just weren't the right fit. And I'm very sensitive to that also. Like when we're bringing people in, we really want them, right? It is not, I can't think of the right word. It,
Tokenizing.
What?
Tokenization.
Yeah, sure. That's not what I was looking for, but that one works because that's not going to help us. Tokenizing does not help us. So my staff, yes, it varies depending on the year as to how many. It's always predominantly white. Always predominantly white.
No, and that was a great answer. It actually covered. So my next question was going to be regarding tokenization, but you kind of touched that. So as I'm looking at the time, I want to drill down just two last questions. One, you spoke to, okay, I didn't get anyone, but I felt that we made positive strides. So with regards to DEI and recruiting, how do you, or DEI initiatives, period, how do you define them as successful? If your board said, how do we know this worked?
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Or your staff for that matter.
I think, right. How do we measure success? And so often people want to measure success with quantitative data. But I find that qualitative data are really underutilized and super important. The qualitative data are the stories. Those are people's impressions. Those are people's beliefs. And that's really important. It does, whatever the quantitative data say, if people don't believe it, it doesn't really matter what the quantitative data say. When I have students who tell me that they feel respected, they feel like they belong, they feel understood, they feel challenged, they feel accepted, those to me are really important data points. Conversely, when somebody tells me that they don't feel respected, they don't feel like they belong, those are also really important data points. I have had more issues around LGBTQIA than I have had around race, at least explicitly. And so I have sat down with groups of students to help facilitate conversations, but also to understand perspectives. And kids tell me, you get it. You get it, Dr. Spann. And to be clear, Shauna, I'm not suggesting that I'm all that and more. I'm not. There's so much more that I want to be able to achieve and affect and understand and be able to articulate. But from the kids' perspective, what they see is somebody who's genuinely trying, somebody who's not going to shy away from the difficulties, whether it's race or LGBTQ. I was with a group of students who I didn't know at the ISD. Some of those kids are mine. They were in the culinary arts program. I ordered lunch one day and I said, hey ladies, how's it going? And then I immediately stopped myself and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, full stop. I'm trying to be better about not making assumptions. And that didn't do that. I don't even know how you all identify. And they laughed. And then immediately 3 people said, thank you so much. Actually, the 3 of us all do identify with she, her, hers. But this other person who's supposed to be here right now, will be back in a few minutes, doesn't. They identify as they, them. And we never find adults. We never see adults who are even aware, let alone trying to change their language. We thank you. Thank you so much. It was a nice little interaction. I walked away. I came back to get my food when it was done. One of them came up to me and said, we're still talking about you. You're our hero today. Because we've never had somebody, right? It was such a simple thing. But it's about awareness for us first. We need to be aware of our own language, our own, how we see things, how we perceive things, how we respond to things. We have to be aware of ourselves first and how that can be interpreted, and recognizing that I might use the word African American, and somebody else might say, I don't want that word. I want the word Black, because while my skin is dark, my family doesn't hail from Africa. It hails from another part of the world, right? I can be right in this context and be wrong if I'm in the next context. And I have to be able to recognize that and own it and be able to transition and be flexible and have grace, right? And not be upset and not respond with upset, but just say, thank you for correcting me. I'm glad to know that there's a better way for me to handle this. I appreciate it. I don't have to get defensive. I just have to be responsive. And it's not about it's not about my intention. It's about my impact. I can have the best of intentions, but if my impact is harmful, that's what I have to respond to.
Thank you. Speaking of intentions, I was very intentional in bringing you on this YouTube channel, this segment. Part of the reason, and I'll own it to my audience, is because you are a white female. Mm-hmm. And there's two reasons there. So we know statistics shows that the high 80s, or somewhere in the mid 80s, I would say, of educators are white women. Yeah. So although their target audience and their students may not be white, those are the teachers. Now, strangely enough, although 82% of white women are teachers, not 82% of superintendents are white women, or women for that matter.
Right.
So the fact that you've been a teacher, so you can relate to the young white teacher, female teacher who's sitting in front of these students, and also the fact that you've made the jump to leadership, you're a role model. So that's why I asked you here. Now I'm going to pose to you a specific question with those things in mind. A female aspiring to be a superintendent, what advice would you give them? How should they navigate the educational space to get to the chair you're in?
Sure. So 25% of superintendents in Michigan are female. And so I certainly went to interviews where I feel like it was a token interview. They could say that they interviewed somebody who was female. So one, if this is something you're interested in doing, once you get to that point where you're interviewing, don't give up after you get rejected. You've got to keep getting up, pretend like you're Weeble Wobble. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down, right? You get knocked down, get back up. You get down, get back up. You educate yourself, whether it's through texts like yours, right? All for them, your technical guide on becoming a really good leader, and paying attention to the messages that are in there, that whole crawl, walk, run, in how we approach, because we all start by crawling. Even as leaders, we don't start running. And even once we become runners and we're expert, we will still stumble and have to get back up, right? And that's a point that you really hit on in your book, that I think is important. So people need to educate themselves. They need to be really clear about their belief system and what's important to them, because that's what you have to speak to. And when you go into leadership, it's a recognition that, for me, that you need somebody who will stand at the helm of the boat. Everybody's work is important on a boat, everybody. No one person is more important than the next. Stated differently, it's like the body, right? You have the integumentary system, the skin, you have the cardiovascular system, the nervous system. They're all important. If you take any one system away, you die. So you can't just say that the brain is the most important or the heart is the most important, because once you take those things away, the system fails. All of the systems are important. That's to say then, in an education, yeah, the superintendent's important, but you're not all that and more. The teachers are important. The secretaries are important. The custodians are important. The bus drivers are important. Food services are important. Everybody's important. All of them. So you have to be clear about that. You have to be clear about that. When people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm in education, and they say, "Oh, you teach?" And I say, "Well, actually, I'm just the WD-40." And they'll just say, "Oh, okay." And they don't. Some people will push back and say, "Well, what do you mean?" Somebody will have to really drill down with me before I tell them I'm a superintendent of a school, because people hear that and they start making assumptions about what that means and who I am based on the positional power that that title holds. So, advice: be clear about who you are and be clear about what leadership means to you. I'm going to very quickly, I think I have this from Marty Chafee at Open Schools, leadership. And he says, we can lead from the top. I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. I'm going to tell you what to do, but I'll take your input. Middle, we're going to figure it out together. Here, you all tell me what we're going to do, but you get my input. Down here, you tell me what I have to do. I have no input. There's a time and a place for all of this, Sean. There's a time and a place. When somebody drills through the gas main on your campus and you have to shelter it in place for 6 hours and figure out an egress plan with the command officer and keep everybody safe and nobody can enter the campus or exit. I've lived that. I had that happen as a principal. Nobody wants to get together and have a committee. Everybody wants somebody who can give direction right now. Here I am, Kristy. What do you need me to do next? Done. But this is not where I live. Conversely, you have you want to have a baby shower for whomever, Mrs. Vashti. You have a baby shower. You don't need any input from me. You just tell me where I have to be, how much money I got to give you, right? But this is where I live. It's to the best of my ability. I live in the middle. Let's figure it out together. As a superintendent, I have to do this a little bit more. I get your input, but I'll make the decision. My point is that when you are interviewing for these kinds of positions, you have to be clear about who you are and what you believe and what is your approach to leadership. Mine is we're doing this thing together. I'm the WD-40. I will help the system. I will try very hard to address all the squeaky wheels. And I'm very clear that I am not perfect. I bring the best version of myself I have every single day, and I will make mistakes. I wish I wouldn't. And people say, well, of course, you're human. I say, yes, until I make the mistake and then people are upset. But that is part of the human experience. We do. And so we have to have grace for one another. And I have to have grace for you when you make mistakes. And I hope that you can have some grace for me when I make mistakes.
Absolutely. So I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to reduce this to one word. So you had to choose one word of advice for women aspiring to be a superintendent.
Persist.
Persist. All right. Next one. One word to describe your educational career so far.
Insufficient.
Okay.
It's hard. You're throwing this at me. I'm like, oh gosh. I mean,
that was your one word. We'll go with it. Yep. All right. That's perfect. I think that's a great place to close at. So everyone, this is Sean Fisher, proud CEO and owner of the Fisher Educational Group. And today I've had guest speaker, Dr. Kristy Spann, who would prefer for me to call her Kristy, proud superintendent of Bentley Community Schools. And today's topic was diversity, equity, and inclusion, or rather how to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into your school districts. Dr. Spann, would you like to say anything before we close out?
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. You are relentless in this, and you've stayed the course for so many years, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate having you as a think partner, and know that my goal through all of this is to really support everybody. This is a piece of student artwork, 2 hands. And one of my Bentley students a couple years ago, I said, oh, if you don't want that, I'd love it, because it embodies, I think, what's important. We don't have to be the same. Whatever, these are completely different hands. But it's the diversity that makes our relationships richer. And we can do it together. So.
And please know, the personal and professional appreciation is likewise. To my audience, thank you all for joining us on this Saturday. Dr. Spann, thank you. I know you have a million things to do, but finding this segment of time to donate to our viewers and myself, truly appreciate it. Everyone, we will see you next week. Thank you.